Americans don't support this war. When Assad crossed Obama's red line in 2013 and used chemical weapons, on all this in air quotes, used chemical weapons the first time in 2013, Americans spoke out against the war, and Congress rejected the war. It went down to Congress, and so the people are not in favor of this. However, when we're talking about American foreign policy, it matters to our allies, it matters to commitments that we make, that we don't get humiliated like this, because this is an instance where we backed the rebels, we backed the Kurds. I mean, we backed a lot of people and said we were going to help you out. We made a lot of promises, a lot of guarantees, particularly to the Kurds, about autonomy, and they were going to get all this stuff, and also promises to people all over the world. And so now for this to blow up in our face, and Assad to win this war when he was losing it badly, and with the help of Russia and with the help of Iran, you see this axis forming now in Eurasia. It's going to be a big embarrassment. It's going to hurt us a lot in the future if we try to deter Russian aggression elsewhere, Chinese aggression elsewhere, regional aggression on the part of Iran or other actors, people who are using weapons of mass destruction. You know, what's the message that it sends to Kim Jong-un in North Korea? If time and again we say, Assad has to go, he's a butcher, he uses chemical weapons, he uses weapons of mass destruction. Well, even though America went to great lengths to support the insurgents, went to great lengths to support the rebels, and we turned Syria upside down for almost a decade, well, Assad still won in the end with the help of Russia, who's not even like a major player, or at least they haven't been for 25 years. So what's the message then to North Korea when we tell them, don't use nuclear weapons, don't test nuclear weapons, or else we're going to take you down? They're going to say, yeah, well, I think we'll be all right, basically. And in the future, who knows what else might happen. If people like Iran start to develop a nuclear arsenal, or other actors in the area, people that we don't necessarily have as our allies, well, it's going to blow up in our face. So that's why this is a big deal for America. That's why it's a big deal for Turkey. Clearly, I mean, we know why Assad wants this to happen. Assad wants control of his country. So this is something he's been talking about for a long time, since late August, basically, mid to late August, saying that the last major area that needs to be liberated is Idlib, and we're going to take care of it, and then basically we'll restore stability and peace to the country. Ultimately, that's what's best. But then, once that happens, we move into the end game of the Syrian civil war. Then, once the conflict is over, it turns into how are we going to bring Syria back together diplomatically through peace talks, through diplomacy, probably more tripartite summits between Russia, Iran, and Turkey to get the Turks out of Afrin, to get the Americans out of northeastern Syria, and then, you know, cleaning up the rest of it is just a logistical thing, basically. And so that's where we're at. Now, what comes into play later on then, and what really comes to the forefront of this issue is not the strategic concerns. You know, it's not a very compelling thing for America to say, hey, don't take back control of your country. Russia, don't help your closest ally in the region take control of the country and maintain your military bases and so on. Iran, don't help Assad take control of his country so you can have your influence there. I mean, that's not really compelling to just say don't do it, because that wouldn't be good for us. Because then we won't have as much leverage in the region. We won't have as much leverage over regional powers, global powers, and to communicate it purely in terms of strategic interests. It's much more compelling to make sort of this veiled threat, and that's what's been going on since mid-August. And I'll read you a quote here from John Bolton. This was at a press conference in Jerusalem on August 22nd. He said, quote, "We now see plans for the Syrian regime to resume offensive military activities in Idlib province. We are obviously concerned about the possibility that Assad may use chemical weapons again. Just so there's no confusion here. If the Syrian regime uses chemical weapons, we will respond very strongly." And they really ought to think about this a long time. And so I think it's kind of interesting. As we've talked about Syria, notice, I mean, I've given you the entire overview of what's happening, why it's happening, why people are doing what they're doing without any mention of chemical weapons. And that's because it has nothing to do with chemical weapons. As I said earlier, it has to do with interests on the ground, about geopolitics, about posturing, that kind of thing. It has to do with the fact that Russia wants Assad to win so that they can be an arms dealer and shore up their economy, so that they can protect their allies in the Middle East like Syria and Iran, so that they can protect their military assets in Syria. They have bases in Tartus and in Latakia. Why does Iran want to have Bashar al-Assad take over the country? Well, they want to build a land bridge to Lebanon so that they can support Hezbollah, so that they can have more regional influence. And Assad clearly wants to take over his country. America opposes that for all the aforementioned reasons. John Bolton, however, does not bring any of that up. He says, well, they're going to use chemical weapons. That's probably nonsense. It was probably nonsense in April 2018. It was probably nonsense in April 2017. Probably there's limited use of chemical weapons in Syria, maybe. And if that's happening, it's on the part of the rebels or ISIS, but probably not on the part of the Assad government. The reason he says it, however, and why we would fake that or why we would do a false flag is a form of deterrence. It's to say you're getting ready to go against our interests in Syria. Assad is going to try and take back Idlib, and we don't want that to happen. Well, gee, I hear that if they're planning on taking back Idlib, they would probably use chemical weapons. And if they use chemical weapons, then surely we would have to respond. Surely that would be crossing a red line. And the reason they bring up the chemical weapons is because that's something that the masses in this country can get behind. That's something that all the countries of the world agree on, which is the non-proliferation of WMDs, chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. So John Bolton says, well, if you move forward with this offensive, which we can't really prevent it, we're over here. It's something that is very good for you. It's something very bad for us, but you probably shouldn't do it, because if you do, well, we'll just we'll spill water on your pants and say you peed, and everyone will laugh at you, basically. We'll say you did a chemical weapons attack. We'll sneak in special operatives from the UK. We'll do a false flag attack, or we'll just blame you, whatever. And that will be the pretext for some intervention, and we will punish you. And now this is twofold. Now, the John Boltons, the Nikki Haley's, the neocons, classical neocons, the reason they say that is because they want to use this as a pretext to actually do damage to the Assad regime. They actually want to enforce regime change. They see the Syrian civil war as going very poorly because their side is losing. This covert warfare using rebels and arming rebels and training rebels has obviously not worked out. So they want to have a big pretext to justify an escalating American involvement. As in, you know what? Rebels aren't getting the job done. We just want to invade. And you didn't listen the first time in 2013. You didn't listen the second time in 2017 or the third time in 2018. They really, really want one day for Trump to give them the green light and take out all of Assad's air capabilities. Blow up all his planes, blow up all his airports, and so on. Or to somehow neuter the Assad regime, or to put boots on the ground. But basically, they want their regime change by hook or by crook, and that's why they want this chemical weapons thing. So that it's the pretext, they can go in, they can justify it to the public, to the world, just like they did in Iraq. Now, the other reason that we might do this, and this is what Trump has been doing in 2017 and 2018, is using the chemical weapons to posture. And to me, this is basically benign. It's not ideal. We don't like to see it. I'm going to put this away so I don't look like a wizard, just like with a wand, because I'm basically done gesturing. But this is basically benign. It's mostly about posturing when we see Trump do this. We say there's chemical weapons. If there are or there aren't, it doesn't really change it. We do a very extremely limited strike on the Assad regime. And all that does is it's basically a perfunctory. And what I mean by perfunctory is just like the minimum possible response. So that it's like we've just checked the box. We've done what's required of us to keep our credibility. The use of a chemical false flag in that instance is not to justify major ground force, not to justify some kind of backdoor regime change, some kind of decapitation strike, either taking out Assad or taking out his capabilities, but purely to say, you attacked Idlib, and we didn't want that to happen. So now we're going to punish you. And the purpose of the punishment is nothing more than demonstrating to the world that we'll respond to that. We can respond to that, and we will respond to that. It's not going to change anything on the ground, but it's just going to communicate to the world that if people go against our interests, we can strike them anywhere in the world. We can do that. We will do that. Nobody can hit us back. And that's basically what we saw in 2017 and 2018. When there was an alleged false flag chemical attack in Homs, Syria, in 2017, what did we do? We launched 50 missiles and did basically no damage. We attacked, I think, one airfield. It was operational within 24 hours. So it didn't change anything on the battlefield. All it did was say, you attack people and we tell you not to, we're going to respond. And Syria, they didn't respond to America militarily, never attacked American targets. Russia didn't attack American targets. Iran didn't attack American targets. We were able, with impunity, to strike Syria and basically slap them on the knuckles with a ruler. In 2018, the same thing happened. They did a chemical attack in Ghouta. And basically, they were just attacking Ghouta. They were liberating another rebel stronghold, which was one of the de-escalation zones. And we said, you can't do that. And they did it anyway. So we said, oh, you did a chemical attack, and now we're going to strike you. And what was the strike? We hit 3 buildings. Nobody was even killed. We gave them a week's notice. Russia was fine with it. Syria was fine with it. It changed nothing on the ground. But all it communicated was, we can get other people now, because France and the UK also participated in those strikes. I think it was 120 or 150 missiles in total that time. And it was to say, well, we can get other people to go after you as well, and nobody's going to say anything. And we could do this another time, And so that's the purpose of talking about the chemical weapons. It's deterrence, and then the strike that comes later. And we don't know if there will be a strike this time. There may. I mean, there's a good chance that it happens if they go through with this siege on Idlib. And what will happen is they'll probably take Idlib. They'll probably work out something with the Turkish government to maybe evacuate civilians, make it so that it's not a protracted and bloody conflict. They'll end up taking Idlib, and maybe at some point there's a chemical attack. Russia will say it's a false flag. The UN will say it was totally legitimate. We'll do a surgical strike, a tactical strike. God willing, it's a slight escalation from the last time. Maybe we build 10 buildings this time and we bomb 10 buildings this time and nobody's killed, right? And it'll just be a slap on the wrist. The strategic situation won't change. Assad will still be on the winning side, his military intact, and so on and so forth. And so that's basically the situation here with Idlib. That's why people talk about chemical weapons. Russia has responded to the statement by John Bolton. The Russian Defense Ministry, their spokesman Igor Konashenkov said that the jihadist group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that's the biggest faction. They're the ones that run Idlib and run this area over here. They're al-Qaeda affiliates, by the way. So remember, these are terrorists. So Russia's not exactly bad. Assad isn't exactly bad for killing terrorists.